All right, guys, welcome back. As you can see, we're inside today on the coffee table. We've just been for a visit to the Rusty Beauties shop, and we've returned with some gauges that you see here on the coffee table. If you haven't been following along, Elin and I are working on a 1962 Triumph TR4 project. It's actually my car, and we are attempting to get the car into a good enough and safe enough running condition that it can be driven to the six-pack trials in September. So today I was over there earlier and I managed to pull the white dash, the white metal dash out of the TR4 and retrieved all of the gauges. And we are in the process now of taking them apart and cleaning them up. So I'll take you along the way a little bit. I've done a few sets of these, I think, on video. Nothing too detailed, but I'll take you along the way and give you a little bit of detail as to how to get the rims off and the glass separated, for example, and what I use as far as cleaning products are concerned. And we'll make these look a little bit better. They're not going to be a concours standard, but if you've watched the video on Elin's channel, and maybe I'll put a few links to it, there's probably going to be at least 2 videos out on the car by the time you see this video. I will put those links so you can see what the progress is on the car and what we are trying to do with the car. Again, this is definitely not going to be a concours project. It's definitely a Rusty Beauty, we're going to call it. It's got a lot of patina that we intend on leaving, but we're going to make it a safe driver. So with that intent, we're going to clean up the dash a little bit. We're going to clean up the gauges just to make the interior compartment a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more homey. So that's why we've got the gauges here on the table. We're obviously going to make sure that these function correctly as well. We hope that they do. So anyway, without further ado, let's get crack-a-lackin'. All right, before I got to start on the TR4 gauges, I thought I would go and take a quick look at what I had in my spares upstairs. And I do have a couple of gauges here that I don't think I'm going to use. They're slightly different. This is the TR4 gauge, and you can see it's got a bit of a different indicator for red line, whereas this one only has a red line. This one has got basically the sweep here of the red. And from a speedometer perspective, they're pretty darn close. This one's obviously looks a lot nicer than this one, but we haven't even attempted to clean this one up yet. The only reason I took these out of storage was to see if the bezels might be in better condition, and they most definitely are. I don't know if you can see that in the camera. I also pulled out another couple of small gauges I have, again, just for the bezels. So I've got actually 2 different oil gauges here. This bezel actually looks pretty darn good compared to some of these bezels over here, which are pretty pitted. So again, I might just use the bezels. I also found one more bezel just sort of kicking around. So we'll see what we can do as far as cleaning these gauges up. We want to stick with the original TR4 gauges, but it's always good to have spares just to interchange some parts if need be. Even the glass I may swap out depending if these might have some scratches on them. But like I said, I won't really know until I start taking them apart and having a little bit better look at them. But I just thought I would go, like I said, take a quick look at what I have in inventory. All right, we're just about to start the process. So I've gone out to the garage and grabbed a few things that I know I'm going to need. So as far as tools are concerned, a couple of picks basically we've got here, some small picks, and we'll use those to basically release the tabs here. You'll see tabs all around the edges, and you can see one probably there. So those will help to release the tabs, along with these small screwdrivers that we have here as well. And generally we have a little hammer so we can tap those tabs back down when we go to put the glass faces back on. I also have some glass cleaner to clean the bezels and obviously the glass. We do have a little bit of spray polish here, and usually what I do is I spray polish the inside of the actual dial faces. You can use, I've used in the past, I've used Pledge, actually furniture polish, usually just on a Q-tip. That'll actually just clean up the faces and shine them up, and it should keep them looking good for quite some time. So obviously the metal polish is to do the outside bezels, the chrome bezels, to make them look a little bit better. As far as the needles are concerned, this one, if you can see, is probably missing a little bit of paint here. So we've actually got a little bit of white acrylic paint here, or you can use something like a touch-up. This is like a stone white, I think, something like that, a scratch fix touch-up with a little brush on it. Again, you can just use a Q-tip with the acrylic paint, just carefully to touch that up. So and that's generally what I use. A lot of rags and towels standing by over here as far as getting ready to do some of the polishing on the bezels. We'll see how the gaskets are doing on the inside of these. I do have a couple of spare gaskets here, but not a lot of material. But if they're perished on the inside, we may have to create some of our own gaskets. I do have some gasket material I can make those from. So anyway, we're going to go ahead and start. Let's start with the RPM or the tack gauge here, and we can see if we'll make this look a little bit better. All right, the first thing we've done is we've peeled off the old gasket from around the back of the bezel. This one doesn't have one on it, but a lot of them do still have. This one doesn't obviously have it either. Anyway, this gasket was just basically around the outside edge here on the back. So now if you see these little tabs here, we're just basically going to be bending all of these back as we go around. We're just going to bend them back lightly so we can turn the bezel off. So, and then we'll basically turn it to get to this point here. And once you get to this point here, you can detach the glass and the bezel from the actual gauge. So we're going to do that now. Okay, so we've just turned the glass off of the case, and you can see what that looks like separated. It's actually in pretty good shape. There's a little tiny bit of surface rust down here, but the gauge face actually looks pretty good. Even the needle looks pretty good. So we'll just end up sort of polishing that up. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pop the bezel off of this piece, and we'll keep the retainer piece on the inside. We'll separate this bezel and the retainer piece on the inside. We'll clean the glass up, and we'll also try to polish this bezel up to see if we can get that to look a little bit better. There's the current state of affairs. So again, we've got the peak metal polish standing by. We'll go ahead and see if we can shine that up a little bit better. All right, so here are the parts separated. So there's a little sort of rubber gasket that goes around the inside of the bezel and it holds the glass. So you can sort of carefully remove this piece. It is a little bit gingerly to do so, but we managed to rescue this piece here and this little metal piece. You could actually touch this up with a little bit of black touch-up paint if you wanted to. We've got a little bit of surface rust over here. So we might want to touch that up with a little bit of black paint, a little flat black paint. So we'll see if we have a little bit of something we can touch that up with before we put this back together. Anyway, here's what we're after, the bezel here. We're going to polish that up, and we're going to get the Windex out, and we're going to shine that glass up. And as mentioned, we'll use the spray cleaner and polish on the gauge face itself before we put this all back together. All right, we've managed to get the first bezel polished up, and it's actually in pretty good shape. There's some pitting, it's sort of expected, but it looks much better than what it did. It looks much better than something like that. So anyway, we're about ready to put the gauge back together after we do a little polishing on the face. We have cleaned the glass already. So we're gonna put the pieces back together shortly, and we'll show you the end product. All right, the first gauge is done, and I think you can probably see a bit of a difference between the before and the after. Looks much better with a nicely polished bezel, and the face has been polished and the glass cleaned, so that's looking better. So we'll put this one aside and we'll go on to the Speedo. By the way, I did want to mention one thing. So I did grab some, I've got a little bit of black lacquer touch-up paint. So I used that actually just to touch up the inside of the bezel here. And we turned the bezel around the top. So that's the least visible area. Obviously, when it's in the car like that, you can't really see the top of the gauge. So we put that spot that we painted at the top of the gauge itself. So we'll go ahead and we'll do the same process here now for the speedometer. So pretty much the same process. We don't have that gasket to peel off the back here. So we'll bend up those tabs slightly and we'll spin this bezel off, and we'll get to cleaning the glass and the face of the gauge along with the chrome bezel itself. Same process as the tachometer. All right, guys, quick video of the speedometer now complete, and we've rolled the odometer back. I did do a little painting over here on this edge. You can probably see it from this angle. I did paint the needle as well, so that's looking a little whiter than it was. Definitely shined up the bezel quite a bit better, and the glass is looking pretty good. There's still a bit of, almost looks like a little bit of sandblasting effect on these gauges. I mean, they are old, so they're not going to be perfect, but it looks 100% better than it did. So those look good enough to go back in the car, in my opinion. So we'll just set those aside, and then we'll go after. Those are probably the two easiest parts to these gauges. These other ones, the smaller gauges, are a little fiddly to get these apart. You have to be very, very careful of the needles and how they go through the faces here at the top. So I think we're going to probably leave these till tomorrow. It's getting a little late out, so I don't think I want to tackle these tonight, but we'll get back out here tomorrow, probably watch a bit more TV, and just before bedtime, we'll do maybe 1 or 2 gauges, and then we'll finish it off the next day. So making progress. All right, continuing on with the smaller gauges, we've got it broken down into its components. Okay, so obviously this is the oil gauge. So we've carefully removed the face. So you basically just sort of bend the needle up slightly and sort of lift this face plate off, being careful not to obviously break the needle off. And then we'll actually push it back down once we get the face back in place. This little ring here is a little light diffuser, which goes on the outside of this ring when the gauge gets reassembled. It allows a little bit of light to come back into the gauge. Since these gauges on the early cars don't have individual lights, there's actually 2 lights within the little center console that actually illuminate these gauges from the outside, and the light end up shining through the sides of the gauges to get their illumination. So they do not have their own individual bulbs. So we've got the glass and we've got the bezel here. The gasket on the inside here has seen better days. So we'll probably just make a little gasket out of a little bit of gasket material to put that in there to replace that gasket. They tend to all sort of go over that like that over time. So again, we'll just make a little paper gasket, trim it with a pair of scissors, and we'll get ready to put that back in. So we'll get the rest of this stuff cleaned up. We'll get the face polished up, and then we'll carefully put it together. I think we may give this needle, again, a quick paint job, just with a Q-tip with some acrylic paint, and we'll let that dry before we reassemble. All right, oil gauge cleaned up nicely, much better than it was. So that's looking good. So we'll put that aside, and we'll now work on the amp gauge. So the amp gauge, here's the before. And this one's a little bit different. The tabs are way at the back here, so you can see these little tabs here that you need to pry up to split this one. And again, you really need to be careful of the needle pulling it out of that little hole. You sort of have to pull up the front edge of the face and angle it up and push that needle back through the gauge. It's a little bit tricky, but once you do it once or twice, you'll probably get the hang of it. So you just got to be very, very careful, as it's pretty delicate. So anyway, there's the before, and we'll come back and we'll give you the after. You can see here the little plastic side light covers. So we'll try to clean those up as best as we can as well while we're in there. So we'll get to prying these tabs out all the way around. All right, just a quick look on the back of this gauge with the tabs bent up. So again, we should be able to now just sort of carefully pry off the case and obviously carry over the needle. So we'll do that now. We'll separate the case from the back here. All right, quick look of the amp gauge disassembled. And sometimes these go bad on the inside. This little shunt wire in the middle actually melts out of here. So a lot of power that goes through this gauge. So often you see these little shunts burnt out. So this one looks fine. Anyway, there are the components. Again, the little plastic light filter, the glass, the face, and then this dome are the chrome piece basically that we'll polish up. So those again are the pieces. So we'll clean them up and put this one back together. All right, another one down. The amp gauge is done. So it's looking better. Chrome shined up, not too bad. Got the little tabs sort of pounded back down to keep the gauge together. So that's looking good. We've got the little plastic diffuser all shined up as best as it can and put back in there as well. This gauge is a little bit tricky to put back together. You just have to be very, very careful. But anyway, back together and looking pretty good. And now we'll move on to the next one. So what do we got left here? We got fuel gauge. So let's have a look at this for starters. And again, there's the little diffuser around the back. We'll pull off this rubber gasket here around the back. And then there are going to be little tabs along the bezel that we bend back. And again, just remove the bezel from the glass and from the case. And we'll do the same thing. We'll do a bit of a cleanup. And this one's actually got remnants of a spider in it. You see that? So we'll free that poor guy out of there. He's probably been in there for about 30 years. It looks like. It looks pretty petrified. Anyway, let's get that out of there. All right, fuel gauge is complete, and again, looking much better than it did. So we'll put this in the pile over here, and we'll go to the last one, temperature gauge. So this one's looking a lot worse for wear. So there's the before. Looks like somebody spilled a coffee on this or something. Anyway, hopefully this will clean up okay. So let's do the same thing. We'll find the tabs here, pull the tabs up, take the bezel off, take the glass out, clean the face up, paint the needle, and reassemble it. All right, there's the last of the gauges done. That cleaned up nicely, looks 100% better than it did. Let me put the grouping back together. We'll have one last look before we call this job done, and we move on to the next job, which will actually be refinishing the metal dashboard itself. All right, last video of the night. There are all the gauges now complete. So as mentioned, we'll get ready to actually fit these back in the dash once the dash has been repainted. So for the 62 TR4, it's a white dash, so a metal dash. So we'll go ahead and we'll get ready to scrub that down and paint that. That'll be the next day's project before we can actually get these gauges back in the dash. We'll have to let that dry for a few days. So it'll probably be another couple days before we get this back assembled together, but at least we got a good start on it.